I think that tinkering at the edges really isn't going to be good enough if these islands and these island communities in their diversity are going to succeed, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Robert Jenrick.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rossendale, and it's appropriate that you're in the chair today as Parliament's greatest champion of a different type of island, our overseas territories and Crown dependencies. I'd like to begin by thanking the Honourable Member for Havant for raising an important issue and for a range of colleagues from across the House and representing all parts of the United Kingdom from coming today to participate and to give us a complete tour of the British Isles. And I think one thing that we have learnt today is that despite the fact that the British Isles are a great archipelago of more than 6,000 islands and isles, from large ones to small ones, in fact, relatively few of our constituents in the rest of the United Kingdom live on them, and we are perhaps less appreciative of them than we should be, and probably for more than at any point in our history, more disconnected from our coast and our coastal communities. And that's something that as a government we're very keen to change and to ensure that coastal communities and islands are properly represented. And today's debate is an important part in that debate. We want to raise productivity, living standards and economic growth in all parts of the United Kingdom. And of course, islands and island communities are an essential part of that. Today we've heard from different members, from whether that's from the Isle of Wight, Hayling Island, Orkney and Shetland, Cumbria, Arran and others, to tell the stories of their communities, many of which have been very positive. And I think that's an important part of what we've heard today, that living on an island, whilst it can bring specific challenges which government, either at national or local level, has to respond to, also creates opportunities for economic growth and, of course, all the wonderful benefits that come from living in communities which are close, but also, as my right honourable friend from Orkney and Shetland said, can also be very outward-facing to the rest of the world. We do appreciate that there are specific barriers to growth, which can at times include lack of opportunity, and that can be a barrier to social mobility. There can be, quite obviously, poor connectivity and relatively high costs, whether that's for transport, for public service delivery, or for goods in the private sector. And that the mainland, for all the many benefits of living on an island and the wonderful opportunities that that can bring, which no doubt will always live with you if you've grown up on an island, the mainland can exert a strong gravitational pull, particularly to the young, and can lead at times to a drain of talent and youth. Although we have heard today actually of a number of islands where populations are rising, which was very positive indeed. Many of the barriers that island communities face are obviously a natural consequence of their geography and are common to all. But it does seem, crudely, that there are three types of island within the British Isles, of which the Isle of Wight is perhaps unique in the sense that it has a very large population, over 130,000 people, and no bridge linking it with the mainland. So I think it is worth us all considering the Isle of Wight and its specific demands, and that's something I'd like to turn to in a moment. There is clearly a second category of islands which are mostly in Scotland, but there are a few others off England, like the Isles of Scilly, for example, where populations can actually still be substantial, such as the ones that are represented by my right honourable friend from Orkney and Shetland, and where there are no bridges, quite obviously, to the mainland, and they pose very specific problems in terms of remoteness, which again require challenges, although they are smaller in terms of population than the Isle of Wight. And then there are a range of islands, some of which you've heard to do, like Hayling Island, which are connected to the mainland by roads. And that, whilst not diminishing the challenges and the specific issues that they might face, clearly have commonalities with other areas elsewhere in the United Kingdom which are rural and have remoteness issues, but which are, to an extent at least, different to those which are separated from the mainland without any road links. So let me turn to each of these three types, and apologies that this is a crude way of dissecting the issue, but it is one lens, at least, to look at it. In terms of the Isle of Wight, I think we've heard today from my honourable friend about both the challenges and the opportunities of the island, with a substantial population, with no road connection to the mainland. I think it does require government to think carefully about how we can assist the island in delivering public services and ensuring that its economy continues to grow. With the exception of the Isles of Scilly, it is in a unique position within England, at least. And that's something that we do need to think through when preparing new formulas, for example, whether that's for schools, for local government, for policing, or other matters. And with my honourable friend, that's something I'd like to consider in the future. I'll come on to some of those in the time available to me. In respect to the Isle of Wight, and in fact all of the islands that we've discussed today, one of the common threads was digital, and the fact that despite these islands being somewhat, and at times very remote, the opportunities presented by the new economy are huge, and those opportunities are to break down some of those barriers and to be highly connected to the rest of the world. And we heard today about new broadband opportunities in Newport, and I'm sure there are other examples elsewhere within the British Isles. With respect to the Isle of Wight in particular, we are focused on improving digital infrastructure. That's clearly a critical part of life today. The government is investing around £1 billion to make sure our digital infrastructure is fit for the future. And the Isle of Wight, I believe, was one of the first areas to benefit from the £400 million Digital Infrastructure Investment Fund. And that was when investors from Infra Capital channelled some of the allocation into White Fibre to help roll out full fibre broadband to over 50,000 homes. And perhaps those are some of the ones that he was referring to in his speech. And alongside this, Infra Capital are going to invest £35 million of their own money to fund the expansion of the company's infrastructure across the Isle of Wight. So I think that's very positive and does show what we can do working together. Of course, there's more work to be done in that respect. In terms of transport, roads are obviously another vital part of the Isle of Wight's infrastructure. From 2013, the government will provide up to £477 million to Isle of Wight Council for a highways maintenance programme through a private finance initiative that's underway. This will allow the council to carry out vital improvements and maintenance to local roads over a 25-year period. We also recognise that transport islands must be adequate. That's something that wasn't touched upon in my honourable friend's remarks, but I know, having spoken to his predecessor in the past, that there are concerns about the Isle of Wight ferry. And indeed, that's no doubt common to some other situations where islands are served by a single ferry company. The Competition and Markets Authority are aware of these concerns, and it was something that I raised when I had my own first meeting with the new Chief Executive of the CMA, Andrea Crescelli. Of course, the CMA, I will give way in a second, the CMA is independent, and the decision as to whether to take forward any investigations is theirs alone, and the government doesn't have any direct levers to direct them as to which investigations they should choose. But it is a matter that I've raised with him, and I know he's fully aware of.
Bob Seeley.
Chairman, just on that point, I didn't mention the ferries in the debate because I want to talk about more broadly about the economies. Just on that point, the relevant authorities are very well aware that I would be very keen to call for another investigation. However, I am not doing so at the moment because the new Transport Board on the island is trying to work constructively with our ferry companies, and I want to give that a chance to work first for Whitelink, for Red Funnel and Harbour Travel to work more closely and be more supportive to the island and help drive our economy and be part of the solution, not part of the problem, which is why nothing is happening at the moment. It is, however, an option. Thank you.
Well, I thank Mr. for that constructive approach and suggest he engages with the CMA if he wishes to take this forward. In respect of schools, I do appreciate having reviewed, though clearly it doesn't directly fall within my remit at the Treasury, but in advance of this debate, I have reviewed the performance of Isle of Wight schools, and I appreciate that there are, in some cases, some long-standing difficulties. The new national funding formula will help to address this challenge. The new formula, under the new formula, the Isle of Wight stands to gain up to 3.2% for its schools, which represents an increase of 2.2 million, or £140 per pupil. Clearly, the new formula's interest in sparsity will help in some cases, but not in every case for islands, because some islands are actually relatively densely populated. But there are examples within the Isle of Wight where that sparsity provision will help. I believe there are 2 primary schools which will be eligible for funding in that respect. But I do think the specific challenges of the Isle of Wight need to be considered in future funding formulations. If I could turn briefly to the comments by my right honourable friend from Orkney and Shetland, and those islands which would fall into the category of being remote or very remote without any direct transport links through a road bridge. Clearly, these islands require careful consideration by central government and to work as constructively as possible with the Scottish Government where there are areas that we can collaborate. I know that when he was in government, my right honourable friend created the 2014 Island Framework to help to encourage the UK government to work closely with the islands around Scotland. And that's the kind of initiative we'd like to see continue. In respect of broadband, the government recognises these issues and wants to do what it can to assist in Scotland. For example, over £50 million of the Superfast Broadband programme went to the Scottish Highlands and Islands to provide access to download speeds of at least 24 megabits. And the government recently announced the winners of our Phase 1 of the £25 million 5G testbed competition. This includes £4.3 million for the 5G Rural First testbed, which we based primarily on the Orkney Islands. We're continuing to support as much as we possibly can North Sea oil and gas, and we've seen that through continued investment by the Treasury in a strong and stable tax fiscal framework for the oil and gas industry, most recently with the announcement of the transferable tax history, which has been widely welcomed by the industry. And I take my right honourable friend's comments with respect to renewables and the essential role that that will play, does and will continue to play in the future of islands like Orkney and Shetland, and will take away his suggestion with regard to wave and tidal funding. Finally, islands connected to the mainland by road, of which the most prominent one we heard today was, of course, Hayling Island, which sounded like a wonderful place. I'd love to visit the bookshop, the ferry, and on a day like today, we'd all like to be on an island like Hayling. Many of the issues that he raised are common with other rural areas elsewhere in the United Kingdom, and we're very concerned about those, whether it's further investment in roads, and we have launched the large local majors programme, which can be potentially transformative to market towns, smaller communities that require significant road investment projects, and that's something I would encourage him, if applicable, to take up with the Department for Transport. We're very aware clearly about bank closures, and that's a matter that's been widely debated in this House and is common to a number of communities across the United Kingdom. I appreciate that in islands the effect can be felt greater than elsewhere. The school's funding formula will be helpful to many of these communities. It is, in fact, to his own constituency, and that's something that we'd like to see taken forward. In terms of the Coastal Communities Fund, well, this has invested £174 million since 2012 in projects focused on economic development, growing and regenerating coastal communities. The Isles of Scilly have benefited. Hayling Coastal Community Team has benefited recently in 2015 from £10,000 from the fund. And funding round 5 is now open, with £40 million available for spend from April 2019 to the end of March 2021. I would encourage all members, in a moment, I'm conscious of time, I would encourage all members present here today, where it's applicable, to take advantage of that fund, to feed into it and put in their applications as soon as possible. And I will continue to work from the Treasury's perspective with my colleagues at the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government as we proceed to consider what the next stage is with respect to the fund. And the comments that we've heard today with respect to islands, I will ensure that they're fed into that process, and would like to work with the honourable gentleman from the Isle of Wight in particular, and my own friend from Havant, to ensure that the next iteration of the fund takes forward those views and works for coastal communities. So, Mr. Rossendale, can I thank all colleagues who came here today to discuss these matters. We're very committed to taking this agenda forward, to ensuring that coastal communities have the funding and support that they require to have vibrant communities and economies. And over the course of this year, whether it is in deciding upon applications to the Coastal Communities Fund or shaping the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which will be an important discussion and debate to be had within Parliament over the course of the next year, and which I'd encourage again honourable members representing these communities to take seriously and to engage in. We hope we can continue to display our commitment to the islands and their communities of the British Isles.
Alan Mack to wind up.
Thank you, Mr Rosendale. We've had a very good and wide-ranging debate today here in this House. I want to thank all honourable and right honourable members for contributing. The right honourable gentleman from Orkney and Shetland was right to highlight both the opportunities and strengths of islands, not just the challenges. My honourable friend, the member for the Isle of Wight, gave an excellent speech where he emphasised what special and unique places our islands are. My honourable friend, the member for Ayr, Carrick and Cumnock, gave an excellent perspective from Scotland, and I commend him for his service as a fire officer on Argyll and Bute. I want to thank my honourable friend, the Minister, for his thoughtful response and his commitment on behalf of the Government to increasing productivity and living standards on all the islands of the United Kingdom, including on Hayling Island, and I very much would welcome him to visit the constituency in the future. I want to thank both opposition spokespeople for their responses, and particularly the Honourable Lady from North Ayrshire and Arran, and she too is welcome to Hayling Island at any time. I want to thank you, Mr Rosendale, for chairing today's debate, and conclude by saying that we are all islanders, and we all must work together to ensure that all the islands of the United Kingdom, whether large or small, have a bright economic future. And I'm delighted that the House today, through this debate, has committed to doing just that.
The question is that this House has considered the economies of the UK islands. As many as are of that opinion